Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the program. Before we get into today's interview, I want to be sure and remind everyone that our podcast is produced and supported by MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. And before we get into my interview today, I'd also like to introduce you to Resolve, a new supporter of our show. Resolve is a physician contract review company. At Resolve, they believe that knowledge is power for physicians, and that power gives you control over your financial future. Resolve believes that by mining, analyzing, and synthesizing data, they can provide you with the information and insight that empowers you to diagnose the health of your career, fully understand your worth, and maximize your full potential. It's a company founded by a doctor for doctors. Resolve's focus is on the well-being of those whose purpose in life is to care for the well-being of others. If you'd like to have this incredible company review your employment contract, you can find them at drpodcastnetwork.com/resolve. That link is also available in the description of this show. And now let me tell you a little bit about my guest on today's show. Dr. Carla Rotering is a pulmonary medicine and critical care specialist in the Phoenix, Arizona area. She has a really fascinating story to share about her early life, literally living in a boxcar in a railway yard and growing up in a village with a total population of about 112 in rural North Dakota, and eventually going on to medical school and finally a highly successful practice in pulmonary medicine and critical care. Then in mid-career, she realized that something was missing. And for that story, let's hear her tell it. And it is my pleasure today to be talking with Dr. Carla Rotering, who is a pulmonary disease critical care specialist out in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Carla, we are really delighted to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really, really glad to be here this morning.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. As always, the program is called Prescription for Success. I like to start at the beginnings. So tell us a little bit about how you got interested in medicine, when you got interested in medicine, and made that decision to go to medical school.
Great. So, I really didn't think about medicine ever in my growing up, in my childhood or my teenage years. I was a prairie girl. I grew up in a town of about 112 people on the prairies of North Dakota. Yeah. Most of them.
I'm guessing there was no doctor in town.
There was no doctor in town. The closest doctor was about 20 miles away, and you just drove and sat in the waiting room, and he just saw you in the order that you arrived, and that's how you got medical care. Oh, there's an entry in my baby book that my mother wrote that said, "The doctor stopped by today on his way home to clip Carla's tongue." So,
my goodness.
So apparently he had, his name was Dr. Martin. And apparently he'd stopped by. I actually grew up in an abandoned railroad car. And he apparently stopped by the railroad car, and I'm assuming that my tongue was attached to the floor of my mouth and that he did that in the railroad car at the kitchen table.
Well, now that opens a lot of territory. So you actually literally had a kitchen table operation.
We did.
And do you mind sharing with us how the family wound up residing in a railroad car?
It was, my parents were young, and my father had gone with his family to this little town in North Dakota where they homesteaded, but my dad never did any farming. So he did things like set pins, at the bowling alley and got paid by the pin and those kinds of things. And when they were married, he went to work for the railroad, and there was this boxcar that somehow had been converted into a house, a home, a dwelling. And I'm not sure exactly how they got there, but I lived the first 6 years of my life in that boxcar with no running water in the middle of North Dakota. And I have these memories, people, I didn't know there was anything unusual about that. I thought that was just the way of the world. But I do remember that, North Dakota's cold and the winds blow. And I remember my uncles would come and wrap tar paper around the outside of this boxcar and then stack bales of hay to keep the wind from blowing through in the wintertime.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it felt pretty snug to me. I remember having to stand on the arm of the couch to step into the room that served as a bedroom where my parents slept, and then from their bed into a crib, which is where I slept until I was 6. So, yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah. It was a great way to live. I don't recall that as a time of hardship or any of that. It was a really loving, lovely place to live.
Yeah, I bet it was. You're talking about an environment where people don't take anything for granted. They're very grateful for what they have, and I can understand how your memories of that probably are. I don't know if sweet is the right word or not, but I'm sure it had a significant formative impact on you. Yeah.
So it was just a very kind of sweet, safe, kind of cocooned feeling there. And in truth, my goals were to just be in the world, to go to school, to play outside. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite books is a book called The Horizontal World, Growing Up Wild in the Middle of Nowhere. And it's about growing up in North Dakota and the kind of the simplicity and the wholesomeness of that experience. So I always had this sense that there was something out there somewhere that might be of interest, that might matter to me, but I was pretty content. I was, I played a lot of music. I took a lot of music lessons. I was happy with that aspect of my life, and that was enough for me.
Well, now, let me ask you this. In a community of 112 citizens, I assume there was no school in town. So how far did you have to go to find schooling, and where did you find a music teacher?
A couple of places. First of all, there was a school. The first, second, and third grades were all in the same room, and there was no such thing as kindergarten, right? So when the second graders were having their lessons, and I was a first grader, we played jacks on the floor. Right?
How about that?
Yeah. And I got pretty good at playing jacks, actually. But
I bet you did.
So, and it stayed like that until I was in 6th grade. And then in 6th grade, we combined schools with a town that was about 18 miles away. And the grade school went to school in the other town, and the high schoolers came to the town that I lived in. So every morning we went to school. I got on a bus. The bus met the bus from the other town in a farmer's yard. We all got off the bus and changed buses so the bus driver didn't have to drive that whole 18 miles because it's North Dakota and it's icy and snowy and all that stuff. And so we would go to school in this town called Sutton, and the high school kids would come to Glenfield, where I grew up. And then at day's end, we would do that whole scramble again in the same farmer's yard and exchange school buses and go home. But it was a great expansion of my world. I was really dazzled by being in this larger community and, all of these other people that I knew nothing about. I didn't know they were even there before. So it really sort of widened my experience in the world and fed into that notion that, there's probably something beyond this little prairie town that was kind of fun to explore.
Well, now, is that about the time that you began to think about going to college, or had it been something that your parents tried to implant as a goal for you early in your childhood life?
Neither one of my parents had high school diplomas. And so the conversation about college really never came forward. I had one uncle who went to college and was a mining engineer. And that was a large conversation in the family that someone had actually gone to college. And of course, later, many of us did. But I did have encouragement from my teachers at school. But the conversation wasn't part of the family conversation, except to be a little bit in awe of Uncle Maynard, who had gone off to Grand Forks and gone to college, right? An interesting little aside is that my father, when he was 50, got his GED.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And the longing that he had for more education was revealed to me actually for the first time then. Like I never inquired about that. It just didn't register for me, but it didn't serve him in terms of his work or profession or any of that stuff. It was just the longing in his heart to have that.
A matter of accomplishment for him.
Yeah. To sort of contribute to the way that he saw himself, I think, in the world. And he was a really bright guy. So I had that experience of witnessing him. But honestly, the things that led to that, beyond some real encouragement from teachers and people around me, including the musicians and the music teachers that I encountered, in this little town, there was a band, by the way. And I remember the band director came to my father and when I was 7 and said, now my flute player is going to graduate in a couple of years and I'm going to need a flute player. So we're going to give Carla flute lessons if you can figure out how to buy her a flute. Right?
Wow.
And somehow, and I'm not sure how, they got a flute and a piano. And I remember the day that they brought the piano to the house, and we moved out of the boxcar by then and had a house with running water. But my dad and a couple of his friends rolled this piano from the bar downtown. Down the gravel road to our house, and somehow hoisted that thing up a few steps into the front. And I don't think we ever tuned it, but I played it forever. And I thought it was magical.
What a great story.
So the band director's wife gave me piano lessons for a while until she said, well, she needs to go somewhere else. And at that point, my parents drove me to piano lessons in a town 60 miles away every Saturday morning.
Good heavens.
Yeah. I mean, when I look back at some of that stuff, I'm just humbled by what it took.
It sounds like your parents had big plans for you, whether you knew it or not.
Yeah.
Really, that's quite an investment in your child.
Yeah. I always had the sense that there was something really generous
very
about
generous.
the way that they invested in my talents, whatever they might have been at that point. And interestingly, and I suspect that this was my, young interpretation that we'll talk about more, but, that I was able to carry with me for a long time. But that sense of being invested in also came with the price of being obliged.
Yeah.
So I remember that sense of this comes with some kind of obligation from really very young years, and I can't, I can't finger point. I can't say someone said that to me. I think it's just something that, in the context of my culture and where I grew up, it was kind of a rule of thumb.
If I can offer a thought, and I'll see what you think about this, I think that sort of thing is much more likely to happen in a small town environment. It's that idea of it takes a village to raise a child. And I was a small town boy myself, and I got a lot of that. And I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. I don't want to point that in a negative direction necessarily. It's something to inspect as we mature and forward ourselves into different ways of being. I mean, it also came with a great gift of showing up, showing up and really doing my share, doing my part. And I think that has been, in a more refined way, really impactful in my willingness to show up, in our collective willingness to show up for the things that matter.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
Physician Outlook is a new magazine platform built for physicians and by physicians, and it's designed to showcase unique physician talents. Sometimes it might be clinical talents, but mostly it's about the intersection between clinical and non-clinical talents, whether it be writing or painting or cooking, or maybe even making a political statement in front of a state and local governing body, or even at the nation's capital, and dozens of other things. It's available online and in print. It's visually stunning on all of its platforms. I promise it's really unique in terms of physician lifestyle magazines. I think you'll really enjoy it. We think it's just the thing to fill your prescription for success. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook magazine amplifies the voice of any doctor who has something to say, and also uniquely engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get $20 off an annual subscription fee by visiting rxforsuccesspodcast.com/physician outlook. Well, let's see if we can get you into undergraduate school.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
No, when I was 16, my mother died of lung cancer, and she was 35.
My goodness.
She was 35 years old.
Gee.
And everything that I thought I knew to be true sort of dissolved from under my feet, right? And my father he wasn't the most talented parent, right? And he left about a week after I graduated from high school. And I had already applied to college, but I was really sort of in random motion at that point. So he left, I moved into the dorms, and I was still kind of reeling from that life-altering event. And part of that life-altering event was my interface with medical professionals who treated me like I was invisible.
Aha.
Yeah.
I bet that did have an impact.
I don't remember anyone ever speaking to me directly. And I spent hours at my mom's bedside, even after she no longer spoke. So there was something inside of me that kind of said, something's not right here. But the truth is, I started school, I quit school, I married the boy next door, I had a couple of kids, I typed for a living, we moved around the country a little bit as my husband was getting his master's degree, and then went to work, and I was working for a couple of pulmonary docs in Houston. And I was kind of on the job trained to do everything. And I remember sitting back one day and thinking, I think I could do this. In fact, I think I could do this with more heart.
That's quite an epiphany.
Yeah. And the Sunday after I had that thought, I was reading the newspaper, sitting outside with my kids, and I read an article about a woman in her 30s who was a surgical resident. And I had this sudden awareness. It's like, I want to go to medical school. And I wasn't sure where that thought was coming from, so I did look at the sky and shake my fist a little bit because it was really outside of my box. I was married. I had kids.
Right.
I had I had this life on a spreadsheet that I had aspired to. But I couldn't shake that. And we actually went back to North Dakota where my ex-husband got his PhD. And I was working one day for a guy who threw a telephone at me, and I picked up my stuff and walked over to my husband's office and said, I'm going back to school. And he said, well, okay. And I knew in that.
Clearly he knew when to recognize when your mind was made up. Right?
Yeah. Not sure it changed the way that he lived his life very much. But I did. I went and enrolled that day. And
how old were you at this point?
I started medical school when I was close to 30. I was 28.
Okay.
Yeah. I was 28. I had two little kids. I'd never taken a science course in my life.
Yeah, and not an easy stage of your life to be making big changes like that, I'm thinking.
Though it's an interesting thing. When something comes to you and through you like that, it doesn't feel hard, right? So and that's not to say that there wasn't hard work attached to that. It just didn't have the feeling of being hard. We used to call it, the kids and I used to call it making memories. And my ex-husband is a paleontologist, and he did all of his research in South America. So he was back and forth, and we just carried on. And I figured out how to study until the wee hours of the morning and still be okay. And I applied to one medical school in North Dakota. I went to medical school in North Dakota. I applied to one internship in North Dakota, and then my marriage fell apart. And so I finished my residency training here in Phoenix and went on to do fellowship here in Phoenix, and have never really returned to North Dakota except when it's harvest time and the field corn is really good.
Do you miss it?
Well, it's cold.
After having lived in Phoenix, I suspect it probably is.
I miss the people. I miss
different lifestyle, right?
I miss the simplicity of life. I miss the expanse of the prairie. You can, it is really a horizontal world. And there's a silence in the night in the middle of the winter that I've never found anywhere else. But But I'm pretty happy the older I get, the happier my bones are that I'm somewhere warm.
I bet.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Well, I got a couple of other things that I want to ask you about those years. I noticed that your college degree, your bachelor's degree, was in psychology. And at least on the surface, that sounds a little bit unusual to me for somebody who's headed to medical school. It's usually chemistry or biology or something like that. But yet you picked psychology. What was behind that?
So I remember saying to someone back there, if I could figure out how to just help people think and love themselves well, I would do that. I think I need to learn this science stuff. So that was part of it. Part of it was my deep longing to understand the human experience and to recognize how that impacted the quality of our living. And honestly, part of it was that when I had started college the first time before I got married, that was my major, and it was the easiest thing to finish. So psychology had been really primary for me for a long time as a way to reach out and connect with people in really vulnerable places and spaces in their life. It kind of took a back burner to, chemistry and physics, and I'm preparing myself to get into medical school. And it was, this was back in the days when they not only asked me how I thought I could be a doctor and have kids, but how in the world did psychology prepare me to do this work? And I'm sure I bumbled through some explanation of that they felt was satisfying.
Now that we have all those years behind us, let me give you the same question from a different perspective, and that is looking back. Do you think that experience of truly scientifically studying the human psyche made you a better physician?
Yes. Yeah. I went on actually later in 2001 and got a degree in spiritual psychology and a master's degree in spiritual psychology with an emphasis on consciousness and healing.
So this was much later. You actually went back for more psychological study after your medical degree.
While I was practicing.
I can see where your commitment was.
Yeah. There was always something really clear to me that there's this powerful interface between mind and body that we had never quite elevated in our studies. And that understanding that interface would be a powerful way to show up as a physician and would allow me to make differences in people's lives that might not be available otherwise. To see things beyond what I would ordinarily see, or maybe hear beyond what was being spoken.
It's a lot of insight that I would expect is probably absent in the average 20-something-year-old that's getting ready to select a specialty.
Yeah. Well, and I had lots of opportunity to learn how I didn't want to be as a doctor. I had pregnancies during which I got patted on the head. I had... Yeah, I was Rh negative, and that was back in the day when that was just a terrifying thing to be told, and I didn't know what it meant, and all I knew was quote blue baby stuff, and so I expressed my concern to my obstetrician, and he got up from his chair and patted me on the head and said, "Don't you worry about those kinds of things. That's my job. You just go home and have a nice baby."
Oh my, how times have
So
changed.
there were some things that I really that were really clear to me. The experience with my mom's death, and the awkwardness of the conversations that I witnessed, the inability to really connect with the experience that the family was having, get patted on the head, things like that really kind of shored up this space inside of me that confirmed, well, this is how I would like to not show up. I have to tell you, it's not a criticism of any of the folks who actually did that, given where we were as a profession and what was important to us collectively at that time. So I think we do what we know, and that's what people knew how to do.
Well, it's very generous of you to see it that way. I am, however, curious how you decided to select pulmonary medicine and critical care as your specialty to be.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be less than honest to say it didn't have anything to do with my mother's experience. My mom died of lung cancer at a very young age, so I was drawn to that.
Makes a lot of sense.
The other piece of it for me is that I just like the pace of that. I loved critical care. I have loved it all my life. I loved the acuity of what was going on before me, the swiftly changing landscape that would call on us to shift gears in a heartbeat. I loved the potential to be at a bedside, utilizing whatever skills I could muster up in that moment on behalf of a life that was in crisis. I loved the procedures. I loved doing things with my hands, so I liked all of that part of it. But, it was one of those things that called to me. And the other last aspect probably is that some of the people that I admired the most when I was rotating through, all of my rotations were pulmonary critical care docs. I just resonated with them. I liked them. I liked the integrity that they had and the humor that they had and the devotion that they had and the work that they did. And you know how you can just sometimes land somewhere and it feels like home? Well, that felt like home to me.
Yeah, it really does make a huge difference when you consider who your influencers are. And it sounds like these pulmonary people had a big influence on you.
They did.
And good for your patients, because it sounds like they had a really good one on their side. So at some point, you began to enlarge your, I don't want to say you enlarged your interest, because it sounds like you had a big interest in mindfulness long before you ever got into medical school. But at some point, it looks like you really began to integrate that into your medical practice as well. Can you tell me about how that came to be?
When I started practice, I agreed to all the invisible agreements that we seem to make. And I worked really hard. I was devoted. I worked long hours. I worked way too many days in a row. I think in part with a sense that there was a proving that needed to unfold. And I kind of surrendered my life, and I kind of got confused with the distinction between sacrifice and service. And so ultimately, in truth, I hit the wall. I burned out. I had used up all of my physical and emotional and spiritual resources, and I became kind of a shell of the person that had walked through the doors of that medical school some years before with, clear eyes and a bright heart. And that person got lost along the way. And it actually took a nurse in the critical care unit to help me see that. So we worked all day long on a patient who was, had to be coded off and on all during the day. And ultimately, finally, gracefully at the end of this day, he was stable, and we sat down to chart. And I said to her, gosh, I don't think we've ever talked this much before. And she swung her little stool around and looked me square in the eye, and she said, that's because you scare the hell out of everybody.
Oh, my goodness. I have a little bit of deja vu here. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and so my first reaction was, I wonder who she's talking to, who's over my shoulder. Certainly somebody who doesn't care as much as I do, who isn't as committed as I am, who isn't, who hasn't given as much as I've given. And I could feel all that stuff start to rise up, all of my arguments, my defenses, my incredible urge to attack her, which is exactly what she was talking to me about. Right. And then I had this kind of sudden awareness, and it was like, oh my gosh, that's true.
And about what stage of your career were you? How many years into your practice?
Probably about 10 years into my practice.
Uh-huh.
10 years. Interestingly, I was also chief of staff at that point. So as I look at that, and we have a big, hospital, there's about 1,200 members of our medical staff. It's still big, and I still sit on that exec at that hospital. But so not only was that infusing my relationships with work, not only was that a part of my leadership, it certainly was being carried home, but it was also what I was taking to the bedside. And I think if there was an awareness that humbled me the most, it was that awareness. Was that, oh, this is what I'm carrying. So that led me to begin to look. And I looked at all kinds of stuff. I looked at integrative medicine, and I looked at all kinds of programs. And then I went on this cruise called the Inner Voyage Cruise. And it was, it wasn't for medical people. It was just about exploring your inner landscape. And someone on that cruise said, well, you just need to go to the school that I went to. I said, great, what's it called? And she told me, and I wrote it down, and I called them when I got home, and I said, I need to come to your school. And they said, well, do you need to know anything about it? And I said, no, I'm a busy woman. I don't have time to have this conversation with you.
You don't spend a lot of time making decisions, do you?
My son says I kind of Forrest Gump my way through life.
Well,
which is not exactly true, but it is true on occasion.
it appears to have worked.
It worked for Forrest. So, so I started this program in spiritual psychology, and I was practicing. I was still practicing. I mean, really long weeks. And then one weekend a month, I would go to Santa Monica, and I would sit in the back of the room with my arms crossed, rolling my eyes until I didn't, until I was able to kind of crack myself open enough to allow some of this material to gain entry. And my first order of business was to bring some kind of solace and caring to myself. And this awareness that I developed that until I did that what I had on offer wasn't complete. That what I showed up with at the bedside wasn't really whole. And that I couldn't give from a dry well. I couldn't share what I wasn't experiencing. That I couldn't take care of other people if I didn't take care of myself. That's probably one of the greatest awarenesses of my life. It is one of the greatest awarenesses that I choose these days to share with my colleagues and peers on behalf of their well-being, that we deserve all of the caring and attention and nurturing that we so willingly choose to offer to our patients and the people around us. So that's how I ended up back in the realm of psychology. I spent a couple of years doing that, a very intense process. And I began to really notice the changes in my daily experience. And I began to notice that I listened differently. Listened the way that I had intended to listen before I ever got started. That I had the courage to take my heart to work. When before I felt like I needed to keep it tucked away and really safe so that it wouldn't get broken.
It's a really profound realization. I know I don't have to tell you that, but I think, and I'll be interested to know if you agree, that it is something that only a tiny fraction of physicians in today's world ever come to grips with. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think that we are told from the very beginning that we work in a dangerous and brutal environment. If we let ourselves be moved by what's going on before us, in front of us, around us. And I think that the whole notion of equanimity, which is deeply connected to compassion, has been misunderstood as staying separate, as being protected, as not being moved by what's going on. And I think we honestly believe that, if we take our tender selves to work, that we're just going to get hurt. And in part, that's because we don't really have the understanding, the tools. You can call them soft skills, if you will. I would suggest, though, that these soft skills are the hard skills of today. But we don't really know how to navigate that stuff. We don't know how to manage it. We don't know what to do with those feelings. We don't know how to ask for help. We think that asking for support, for caring, for assistance says something about us that is unsavory.
Yeah. We don't practice those skills, do we?
No. But the good news is, that, look, if I could learn them, given where I was at that point, which is I didn't allow anyone in my home to use a microwave because it sounded like a beeper. And my pulse would go up and I would clench my teeth. Yeah. So, I was really running on fumes at that point in my life. So there's a return from that kind of suffering that is much more satisfying. Kind of reconnects with, for me, it kind of reconnected me to, this is noble work. This is really noble work. Not everybody shows up to do this. Not everyone is willing to do this. And it's a real privilege to be here. See, I'd forgotten that.
So I'm guessing this is about the same point in your career that you began to do some serious writing and publishing and blogging. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Did you find that to be therapeutic as well?
Writing has always been it's a way for me to kind of see things that I didn't know about myself in a certain way. And I've sometimes been surprised, but part of this curriculum at the University of Santa Monica, this degree in spiritual psychology that I got, part of it was these enormous amounts of writing for homework that we did every month. And for me, it was like really excavating all the interior stuff that was causing me discomfort. And the more I wrote, the more I not only discovered, but the more I realized that this is a great instrument to communicate and to share and to create community. So I have written and written and written. I've written poetry. I've written blogs and stuff. And then I had the opportunity I was approached by an organization called the Language of Caring. And their goal was to really help train people on how to let their caring show through language skills. So I co-authored a program and a book called The Language of Caring for Physicians. And in that process, expanded even more, really began to understand how powerful our words are. Not just that our words are powerful, but people trust us, right? They believe what we say. And they're influenced by the way in which we say it, in either positive or not so positive ways. And that not only occurs in our roles as healthcare providers, but it occurs in our roles across the continuum of our interface with other human beings, with humankind. And I think, I'm not sure what you think of this, but I think just by virtue of our physicianship, that people trust what we say, even if it doesn't have anything to do with medicine, right?
Yeah, they will certainly give you the benefit of the doubt on that at first meeting.
Yeah.
And the important duty that I think, and what I think you're getting at is that it is absolutely critical not to betray that trust. Yeah. And in order to do that, you gotta listen and really see inside those people and try to understand what they need, or at least I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's exactly pointing to what I'm saying, and to be able to do all of that and put our own agenda aside as we listen, to not judge, to not be critical, to not be tongue clickers. I always, I have this recollection of this
and head patters.
Head patters, right? Yeah, and to really just connect with whatever that experience is that someone else is having, regardless of how I might think or feel about it, because that's the way that I can get what's going on, and that's the place from which I can help. So, there's a difference between making a diagnosis and prescribing something and being someone who offers physicianship to a patient. And the distinction, I think, has to do with the nature of the relationship and our willingness to allow another human being the dignity of their process.
Well, what a blessing for you to come to that realization in a relatively early part of your career. I think a lot of people figure that out when it's kind of too late, but you have actually put it into practice, and not only a blessing for you, but a great blessing for your patients as well. Are you still doing a good bit of critical care, or has that changed in any way? What is the status of your day-to-day practice nowadays?
So it's changed significantly. I'm 71.
So you got a good 20, 25 years to go, right?
Right? I'm going to take salsa next. So a few years ago, I kind of woke up one morning, Randy, and I thought, I hate this. I'd been on call the weekend before. My bones hurt. I was tired beyond the usual things that we recognize as, tired in medicine.
Yeah.
And I picked up the phone and I called my associates and I quit myself. So I had founded the practice and helped grow it over the years. And I just knew in that moment that I didn't want to do that anymore. So that same day, I got a phone call from a little critical access hospital up in the White Mountains of Arizona on the border of Arizona and New Mexico. And I've been going up there for a couple of decades as a sort of visiting volunteer specialist. It's kind of an underserved area. And they just don't have providers. So they called me and said, we really appreciate what you've been doing, but we're going to need somebody up here part-time and we're going to start to recruit. And we just didn't want you to hear about that on the street. So this is a courtesy call to let you know that we're doing that. And I said, can I have 24 hours to get a proposal to you? And they said, what? And they said, yes. And then I called my coach, because the other thing that I do is a lot of coaching, and I think coaches should be coached. So I called my coach and said, look, I don't even know what a proposal is. But I've got 24 hours to get one in. So he helped me write a proposal that was really self-honoring and other-honoring, which was another first for me, is that I always thought I needed to give more than I got back. And they said yes. And 30 days later, I was no longer practicing in my group. And I took a couple of months off. And then I've been doing this work ever since. I stay very involved in leadership at the hospital where I work, this big hospital in Phoenix. So I still sit on MedExec. I still direct respiratory care and pulmonary rehab. And I chair the professional health and well-being committee there, because my further calling is to make a difference in the lives of my peers.
Well, your peers are very fortunate, and I really do so much appreciate you sharing your story with us today, Dr. Carla Rotering, physician, musician, poet, coach, author. That's quite a list that you got going for yourself. But we are at my favorite part of the program here. It's called Prescription for Success, and that's what we want to hear from you. So I'm going to sit quietly for a moment, and Dr. Carla Rotering, please give us your prescriptions for success.
So if I had the opportunity to go back in time and speak to that younger person and say, here's what would matter for you to really be successful, This is a handful of things that I would offer as a prescription for success. And I've talked a little bit about some of these, but the very first thing would be to take care of yourself so you can take care of other people. So if I could go back to that younger person and say, breathe. Learn how to say no with a smile on your heart. Learn how to say no in the same way that you say yes. Go slower. Be settled. Eat well. Go to Zumba class. Sleep through the night. Cultivate outside interests. Join hands with people and take care of what matters to you. Be the steward of your own experience. Allow that outside factors will always be there. There will never be a quiet outside world from which we can operate. So my first order of business, my first prescription would be to take good care of myself. The second tip that I would give for success is to recognize that I don't have to do this alone. All those spaces and places and points, all the stairwell tears, all the self-berating, all the fear, all the sense of isolation could be managed with one simple request. Can you help me? Can you show me? Will you be with me? Do you have a second? Could I call you? Could we have a cup of coffee? Here's what I'm struggling with. Has that ever happened to you? I don't know how to move forward. So that willingness to abandon the belief that we have that asking for assistance means something about us that is not okay, and recognizing that we were meant to be of service to one another, to care about each other, to connect and help one another. And then I think the last thing would be actually to treasure our friendships and personal relationships. I often say to my children that I'm so grateful that they still talk with me, because I really recognize now in that backwards glance that I placed people at the outskirts of my life, that I was fully devoted to my work, and that I always expected that they would be exactly the way they were when I had time to go back and check in with them. As it turns out, I've been really, really, really blessed to have still a gathering of people around me, but to really nurture those relationships, to invest in them, to give my caring to them, to elevate them in importance in my life, and to let them know that. That's the other thing. You know, we all learn this. We all learn what we need to know from a science perspective. We all master our crafts. We're all going to make a living. We're all going to be okay. So in the end, it's really those things about how did I take care of myself? Did I surround myself with mentors and colleagues and caring family that made my life feel more purposeful and feel more complete? So that's my prescription.
Well, Carla, there is a lot of wisdom packed into those words, and I'm so grateful that you joined us to share that with us today. It has meant a lot to me, and it's going to mean a lot to our listeners as well. So thank you again for being here. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity, as I know people will be interested, to know how we can follow you, where we can find you, whatever you want to share, whether it be email addresses or Twitter handles or published books or whatever. Please give us your list.
So the easiest way to contact me is on my email, carlarotering@yahoo.com. There is my website is in the works, and that will be Dr. Carla Rotering, but it's not up yet, but keep it in the back of your minds. I'm a good Facebook person, so connect with me on Facebook. You can find me through the Language of Caring, which is part of Plaintree International, through David Cooper Consulting, where I serve as a coach and a curriculum developer and have a curriculum there that's online, and through an organization called 4Docs, the number 4 Docs, which is a group of 4 physicians who are doing well-being work.
Well, thank you again for sharing with us, Dr. Carla Rotering. It has been a great pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for joining us on Prescription for Success.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that brings us to the close of another episode of Prescription for Success. I really hope you enjoyed hearing from Dr. Carla Rotering. Very interesting story, I think. But before we go, let me give you that link one more time for our sponsor. If you need help reviewing your employment contract, please make sure before you sign, you reach out to a company with great online reviews and a reputation for doing that and a whole lot more. You can find Resolve at www.drpodcastnetwork.com/resolve to get the review process started today. And finally, don't forget that you can subscribe to our podcast and get more information about our guests by reviewing the show notes on our website at rx4successpodcast.com. Please be sure to leave us a comment, and a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. Finally, another way you can support the show and get some additional benefits is to become a patron by visiting patreon.com/RX4Success podcast. Thank you so very much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.